back in the day, back in the 90s, back in the turn of the century, rappers just had to be good rappers and they would get showered with money.
There was so many talented rappers that never were able to work it out, never got deals, never got support.
So you had proof of concept. You already had the fans. Andy Khan knew this. Shout out to Soul, and I need to get him on here next. But then Epitaph saw it as well, and it was just show and prove, show and prove, show and prove every time. And I feel like there is this narrative. I don't feel like, I see it all the time. There's this narrative out there that back in the day, back in the 90s, back in the turn of the century, rappers just had to be good rappers and they would get showered with money and opportunity from labels. I'm like, I don't know. But again, I came up in the 2000s. So it sounds to me like you still had to prove that you had fans before labels were taking chances on you.
That was the only way. There was so many talented rappers that never were able to work it out, never got deals, never got support. I mean, it was a viciously talented artist base in the underground hip hop scene. And we all benefited from that because, the rising tide raises all ships type thing. We all sharpened each other's abilities because we had to compete with one another on one level or another. And so many things were brand new that we were breaking conventions constantly and trusting that it was not going to be a career killer. What was special about that time was the fact that the audience finally were able to determine who would get attention. And it wasn't the major labels, it wasn't the major corporations forcing it on everybody. They finally had a chance to choose on their own. And they did so with showing support monetarily and by showing up to shows. It became imperative to have a really good live show. So all these talent, you can be as talented as you want in the studio, but if you can't make that translate on stage, which I would like to say is a whole other set of skills. It is not the same skill set. And some of the most incredible rappers in the world have awful stage shows. Vice versa. Some people who can kill it on stage, they understand how to work with the crowd's energy. They know the magic tricks of the stage. They can't bring that to the studio. So it was important for me and other artists like myself to be able to figure out both worlds. And we're figuring it all out at the same time. And thankfully, I had a bit of a career before all this happened. I did have to just grind it out in the local scene and in the local studios and pay for that time and sweat it out and not, wonder how the heck I'm going to pay for this stuff. And once it's paid for, what do I do with it? I don't have any distribution. I don't have a way to get it to people. No one outside of Rhode Island has any idea who I am. I was basically just infiltrating our local college radio station. So college radio was also very big at the time. And that's how a lot of people were becoming familiar with the independent hip hop artists who were putting out their own vinyl, servicing it to the radio stations, the college radio stations across the country. And I'm going to forget a lot of stuff, but all these things that I'm mentioning all played a part. They all kind of came together and helped build what became what we have now, which doesn't include any of that shit, except for you do have to, you don't have to be a great live performer, but I find that to be very important in building yourself as an artist, as a career artist.
Yeah. Well, nowadays you have that whole, I don't know if you've been reading those articles about hip hop ticket sales being down even for bigger artists, and it's always discussed that, and I think it's becoming more and more at the forefront of the conversation, but just bad stage shows or lackluster stage shows, rapping over pre-recorded vocals, that kind of thing. And a lot of people are tying low ticket sales to these poor performances.
Yeah, but I feel like their particular fan base doesn't care about that. Like they don't really care. They're not listening to them or going to those shows because they expect a great live show. Maybe they expect a big production. That's a whole other realm, though. You know, like that's not. I
When
think
the way
maybe
people
inflation
consume
has a lot
music
more to do.
nowadays is so different. It used to be social, and the only place you
communal.
could really
Yeah,
hear
it was more
music.
communal before. Now it's
Yeah.
really fleeting, and yeah, I can hardly make any sense of it, to be honest. I'm kind of sticking to an old school model over here, and I know that the world is passing me by, but I don't care. I know what I know. I want to support the material that I believe in, stuff that inspires me, things that interest me creatively, and it has nothing to do with what's popular, and it never has. You know, I was part of the revolt. There was a revolt. I mean, poor live shows have always been a thing in hip hop. I remember in the late '90s, mid '90s, all the hip hop shows were whack. Like it's just like most of them. It just was like a guy pacing back and forth on a stage with his mic, always the same routine, always saying the same thing to the crowd. It became so boring and predictable. So then when we finally get a chance to get out there, and we flipped the script in so many ways that it was like, nah, we're not, fuck all that, you know, like, you know, and fundamentalists got upset at what we were doing. Like hip hop fundamentalists obviously tried to like squelch or squash everything that we were doing. Didn't want to give it any praise. Didn't want, like, they tried to blackball us in several ways, but it was, what we were doing was beyond them. It was beyond the fundamentalist circles, even if I respected that. And I felt like I came from a fundamentalist background, and, you know, fundamentals of hip hop is what I base all of my stuff on. But there was a time for a break, and some gave us credit, some didn't. And I feel like down the line, more people could explore it and see really what happened with, and how innovative things became with our live shows and what we were doing that hip hop previously would never touch, because it was either too difficult or too risky. And that's what makes that period so special to me. And I think the more we look back on it and we can identify what was different about it and how it evolved into what it is now, how it all started in this like 2 or 3 year period, late '90s, early 2000s.
Well, do you see some of that coming back? Because from my perspective, a lot of the old school approaches are not only still viable nowadays, given that things have become so streamlined and accepted, with, you know, like the streaming and people listening kind of passively, being at home. And now you have the folks like Russ or La Russell, and I look at what they're doing and I think, okay, this is just an extension of what a lot of folks were doing in the late '90s, early 2000s. You know, it's just that with the technology, people felt like they didn't have to do that level of fan outreach. And I think that goes back to the narrative where I hear so many people saying, oh, you know, back in the day, you just needed you needed to have talent. That was it. Yeah, they would sign you. And I'm like, nah, these guys were working. You can't take that away from them. And nowadays you see a lot of artists who are working the same way, and people's minds are blown. They're like, oh my God, Russ is, you know, flying fans out for special listening sessions. Like, I think this is an extension of what, you know, Sage and Soul and Slug were doing back then. But I'm not familiar with Russ. I've seen the name. I know there's some controversy was surrounding him a couple years ago. I don't know much about him, but they all have to figure out new ways of embracing their crowd and letting their crowd embrace them. There has to be different ways to stick out. It can't always be played. You can't play the cards the same way. Our outreach to fans was another break in convention where we were no longer
unreachable. We were within reach, very within reach. We were in the midst of everything. That was a new thing for hip hop. You know, like your hip hop stars were stars. They were untouchable. They were basically gods until a certain point, and now we're all in the crowd with them, and we're rapping with them in the crowd, and we are one of them. And maybe to our detriment, you know, overall, or it's tough to say one way or the other. It came with pros, it came with cons, but I found that to be incredibly important for my fan outreach and my and for them trusting me and feeling like they were part of the Strange Famous thing, or not just Strange Famous, but the independent hip hop scene. Like it just felt, it was more communal, and I do think we've lost that in a lot of ways, because we're not all on the same social media sites. We're not all reading the same posts or updates. We're not all streaming the same songs. Everything's coming out sporadically at different times for different people, and we're not able to stay on the same page with almost anything, unless it's trending on Twitter, but not even that. Like that's none of that even really matters anymore. But I do remember feeling lucky that I could have conversations with supporters of mine or people who believed in what I was doing, and in a lot of ways they would help what I was doing. So they weren't just fans, they were volunteering services and building. If they had a certain skill they knew that I could benefit from somehow, they were more than eager to offer it and be like, yeah, you know, I love what you're doing, I can offer this, I think this would help. I was like, you know, how big was that for me and for all of us? Someone developed my website, you know, like shout out to Danny Brown, not the rapper Danny Brown, but Canada Danny Brown. And our girl, there's just so many people I would shout out who most people would be like, oh, wow, like someone just did that for you. I'm like, yeah, man, it's like, I'm not a millionaire, you know, like I can't run all this stuff on my own. I can't pay a lot of people. But we get by because people believe in what we do, and they're talented people as well.
See, that's another narrative that I don't know where it came from, but the whole underground hip hop and then romanticizing the starving artist image, I think some artists played on it, but maybe it was because there became this kind of this schism in the genre where it was, they gave names to it. You know, they were the backpackers, and then there were the bling rappers or commercial rappers versus underground, whatever it was. And it always felt like we were being sold this idea that our favorite underground rappers, you know, whatever that meant, it just meant you didn't have access to the same resources as the major rappers, really, but everyone's kind of trying to do the same things. We bought the idea that the underground rappers we loved were couch surfing and broke and just living these grimy lives, and just, you know, that was amazing. You know, they were suffering and we loved it because that made
because they did it just for the love.
Right. And and I think that narrative has carried over until today. So I appreciate looking at your tweets and seeing that, you know, and just meeting anybody that came up in that era. The whole like suffering part was trash. Everyone knew it was trash. I don't know where that image came from, but I just appreciate that now people are speaking plainly about the reality behind what those of us on the outside looking in got completely wrong. But why was that the case? Did people expect that from you and other underground rappers?
To this day, people expect me to do it for the love. It's like when or they will show disappointment when I'm eager to work out a business plan, because I've slept on more than enough couches in my life. I never will do that again. I will never sleep on someone's fucking couch. You can fuck off if you ever offer it. You think you're being generous, you're a piece of shit. No, you're not a piece of shit, but you mean well, but no, thank you. Goddamn, like, yeah, we did all that. We did all that. And I don't know if people should have to do all that, but we did do all that because that's what we had to do to get by. And when it comes to a point where I know my worth, and I know the worth of my time and my energy and my talent, please don't undermine it by pretending that I'm an asshole for expecting you to recognize it as well. And if you're not able to come through, just kind of admit it, don't put up a front like, oh, I thought you was a real one. I thought this, you don't love this shit. Isn't it cool? People are going to like get to see you rap or whatever. It's like, yeah. That's cool. But, what's cooler is paying my fucking electric bill next month and not having to worry about, the $10,000 roof replacement at some point and, all the like retirement plan and me not just relying on my kids in my older age to support me somehow.
Man, that roof replacement.
They're always the goddamn every new thing that breaks. You're like, oh, that's $5,000. Oh, okay. I'll just have to sell this SP.
Yeah, it's the whole hip hop artists becoming homeowners thing, and people don't talk about that. And
yeah, bless us for that. It's like that's really cool. We get to do that. Obviously, not everybody can do that. I will say I was a habitual saver throughout my career. I hoarded my money. Whatever I made, I paid off every debt right away, and I put everything else away and invested a lot. And because I didn't need much. I'm not a spender. I don't need things outside of comfort stuff. Like I need my car, I need my house, and but then once I had a family, you see how quickly I was like, oh, good. Thankfully, I saved as much as I did because, man, that took a hit. You got 3 kids, you got a wife, get married, you have to get a new spot, you have to get a new vehicle, this and that all happen at the same time. And I'm like, thank my past me for not being a big dummy and thinking money was always going to be available.
Yeah, that got a lot of rappers, people I've known. So speaking of business, streaming comes along. A lot of people resisted. What were your initial thoughts when you saw the tide turning?
Yeah, I resisted as well, but it was a familiar resistance, one that I knew wouldn't result in anything. There's no changing it. There's no matter how much I complain about it, no matter how much sense I can make to people about it, it's not going to change people's listening habits. It's not going to change how they go about their day-to-day lives and their comfort level of how they consume music and media. So, it just was another obstacle for us to try to overcome, and I'm not sure we can overcome this one. It's very difficult to even like people will stream your music and then you have to guilt them into saying, have to guilt them by saying, hey, I'm not really seeing money off of that. We sell merchandise on our website if you really want to support and get more music of the same. But in their heads, for most people, they don't really believe that. And they don't want to believe that. They just want to think that, well, if you go away, it didn't mean enough for you to keep doing it. And then I'm going to listen to someone else. And that's the mentality, whether people say it out loud or not. I really believe that's what they think. So we just dig our heels in. We try to make our merchandise as alluring as possible and always include extra stuff, but getting people to go outside of even buying on Amazon is a task. So it's like one difficulty stacked on top of the next, and shipping prices have risen again. It's always those things are going up. Inflation is up. People don't have as much disposable income. Blah, 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 blah. So I really don't know. I have to figure out different streams of revenue for sure. I can't rely on what I once did or had done for maybe 2 decades. And even if I can, I know my artists cannot. But where we're at a spot now at Strange Famous Records, practically every single artist or group have full-time jobs and families outside of music. So music is really the thing that they do, back to this, out of love. They love to do it, so they're going to do it. But it's not with the intent of living off of or begging people to listen to it. Like, like with the intensity of, check this out, and they're gonna have to diss someone else to get the attention they need, and this and that. It's like, nah, that's not happening anymore. It's really people loving to be creative and us helping one another make the most interesting albums as possible, and moving forward like that, which is very similar to what it was in the late 90s, because none of us expected to live off of music at all. So there is a nostalgic element to that and a wonderful throwback feeling as far as creating now, when creating music and doing things that are kind of off the wall and not really tried and true as far as what you can expect from releasing it. But at this point, we're kind of like, fuck it. We know what we're doing. We know what we love about our music and our style. So let's build on that. And I think at some point people will come around and realize, wow, there is a treasure chest or a treasure trove of really incredible hip hop in this certain style. And that is kind of like we all work with one another in a weird, like, extended Wu-Tang Clan sort of way in our mix in the Strange Famous world. Yeah.
Yeah. What does it take for an artist to get signed to Strange Famous? And then what are those deals like? What's a fair deal? For the most part, we're not literally signing anybody. I don't hold anyone to a contract. But I basically say whatever we put into an album, once we recoup, it's a 50-50 split between the record label and the group or the rapper. And that's how I've been running it since day one. And I also have given people the opportunity now to print their own merch and sell it, and they never have to give us any kickback for it. So if they put in the time and energy and the money into making their own shirts or CDs or tapes or vinyl, and they want to sell it, and we'll even help them sell it on our website, because I know that's how most people make money off of their music. And I'm not going to be like, I don't want to be the shitty label guy. It's like, every time you make, we need to get a portion of that, But the thing is, we're not making enough money overall to keep it running on a scale that it needs to run. But we figure, like, I subsidize it with the Sage Francis stuff in most years, yeah. So, but it's been all love. So, what did it take to sign a Strange Famous? I think it's that's a really good question, because it's not a list of things I could tick off and say, okay, that, you meet the requirement. For the most part, you have to be unique and interesting enough that it piques my interest, or I want to be impressed by what you're doing. And you also have to show that you're not a knucklehead, and you won't be a problem, and you won't pollute the waters that we've maintained at our label, because I feel like we have a very good rapport with one another. Sometimes things don't work out. Like, I'll take a chance on certain artists, and they'll expect more from us than what we can do, or vice versa. And it won't feel right. So it's not natural. So it's best that I already know the person ahead of time, and that they've been in our mix, and maybe they've worked with some of our artists. So I have some sense of who they are and how they operate publicly and personally. So all those things put together, if you get a green light in my brain and we have enough space in our roster or release period per year, yeah, you will be considered. But we are run by two people. It's me and Storm Davis. So we can only take on so many acts per year and releases per year, because once I release my solo stuff, which is rare, but when I do, a lot of our resources, almost all of them, go into that. And that's what I'm going to be looking to do next year. So,
Yeah, someone I just did an interview recently. Someone was like, "Well, what does it take to get signed to Strange Famous?" It's like, uh, I think I gave you a better answer than I did them. I'm gonna have to
Thank you.
remember that one. Yeah.
On the subject of deals, I noticed on your Spotify you have pretty much your full catalog, back catalog included. What were the deals like then, with previous labels that allowed you to do that, or do they still have a hand in the music, or are you now at a point where your rights have been reverted back and like you own your masters again?
No, I can never get them back from Epitaph or from Lex Records. So, and when I signed deals with them, streaming services didn't exist. And in fact, I don't even think iTunes was selling MP3s when I first signed with Lex. And I've always wanted to go back and look at those contracts and maybe retroactively take away their rights for stuff that they didn't specifically talk about in the contract. But it's probably impossible. I don't know. But
Well,
I didn't like
it's
it.
like the De La Soul situation, right?
I don't know. I thought De La Soul couldn't get their stuff up on streaming because of all the sample issues, and the label didn't want to deal with it.
I think
And
there
then
was
maybe
that,
they just
but there
gave
was
it
like,
back to De La and said, "All right, fine." I honestly don't know what
I
happened.
gotta
with
look that up. But there were a lot of artists, a lot of rappers who, literally every rapper who had a deal in the 90s and early 2000s did not sign a deal that included any stipulations about streaming technology just because it didn't exist. So they just retrofit everything. And
Okay. Yeah, no, I remember now. I do. Yeah, I read an article about that a while back. However, I would have to think that ownership of the master recording would allow the label or the owner of the master to release it in whatever format.
yeah,
I think that's what I'm thinking. But when it first started happening, I remember thinking, "Hey, well, I didn't give you the rights to put it out on vinyl, or like I remember specifying how it could be released." And then when MP3s came about, and then the streaming services, it just was like, I really don't know if they have full rights for all this, and maybe we need to think about how to rewrite this contract. And the man, I've been lucky with the deals that I've made through my life, and I feel like I'm a pretty good businessman overall, but I've certainly made mistakes, grave mistakes that I hate, and I feel like a fool because I've always known that these things exist, and I always heard artists gripe about this type of stuff. And even if I had an entertainment lawyer and everything, and it just still didn't feel right at the end of the day, the way it all panned out. So there's really no getting around feeling like maybe you're not being paid your worth or someone took advantage of you. Probably it's just inherent in almost every artist, but I got that for sure.
yeah, we're coming up to an hour, so I want to respect your time. But final question: what is an experience that you had in the music business that taught you something that you think would benefit aspiring artists today?
Well, I'd have to think about what they're dealing with today, because a lot of the lessons I could teach just don't translate anymore. Specifically, what I just talked about, like, because people aren't getting these like indie record deals that fuck the artists over too often. But I think it is important, if you're signing a big deal, not to get swept up in the feeling that, wow, you matter. Someone finally recognizes you and your talent, so that makes you kind of bend over to whatever their will and whim is. Always try to look at something from an outside perspective, or have an outsider look at it. Get a lawyer. If it's a big enough deal, if you're dealing with tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's very few artists I'm speaking to right now, but always have the people that you trust and a lawyer look it over, and don't go on your feelings. Business is not about feelings, right? So, and you have to live those two lives if you're going to have a career as an artist. You have to have a business life. You have to have your artist life. They don't they don't coexist peacefully. You can't just be one and not the other. So keep that in mind, and keep your nose clean, because people are going to come after you if you're a piece of shit.
All right. Speaking of people coming after you, what's the best way for, like, let's say there's someone who either wants to discover or rediscover Sage Francis. What's the best way to do that?
I guess I should point them toward our Bandcamp, the Strange Famous Records Bandcamp, because they got not only my my studio releases, but my mixtape releases. And the mixtapes were a huge part of my career that most can't be streamed on streaming services. So a lot of people just never are privy to them. They don't come across those songs. And there's like incredible material on the mixtapes. And that's something I'm going to have to rectify sooner than later. Not meaning I'm going to put them on streaming services, but I have to figure out a way to make it all easily accessible to the people who would like to just like figure out more about what Sage Francis is as an artist and his sound and his approach to music. So yeah, I would say that, but Strange Famous Records, strangefamous.com, fish around. There's so much wonderful stuff there that I'd be surprised if people went there and thought, oh, this is some like fly by night bullshit. I'm not going to buy, like, this is our brick and mortar of the internet. It's been around for over 20 years now, and we're going to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, that put things into perspective when you said since 99. So this is definitely the convergence of love and business, and probably just being stubborn. I don't know anyone that's succeeded in the business without all three. So yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. Personal Journals continues to be one of my favorite albums, and obviously I love all the new stuff you put out too. So,
well, thank you. Speaking of Personal Journals, we celebrated the 20th year anniversary recently, but there's one thing we didn't release yet, which is we had a painter did 100 paintings of the cover, but all variations of the cover, numbered, signed them, and we're going to be releasing those, and obviously it's super limited. So it's outside of the action figure that we did, which was really fun and weird. This is like the one big special blowout event of this Personal Journals celebration to end the 20th year anniversary. And now we're actually at the 22 year anniversary point of it, but never mind that, because the COVID years don't count. Yeah. So that's where we're at. I appreciate you having me on, man. I'd love to talk to you more when we get a chance, but I know life's crazy, but we're lucky enough to cross paths every so often. I appreciate that. Appreciate you.
So the paintings, those haven't been released yet, that people can't get those yet? Okay.
No, probably in like 2 weeks. I think we're going to just make the announcement and make them available. And there is a special email list I have of everyone who is interested in the Personal Journals releases that I'll hit up first and be like, yo, you missed out. A lot of you missed out on the action figures. So here, I want you to have a first look at what we have available for these paintings. And then it'll go to the general public after that.
So it's like an NFT, but real.
Yeah, it's a real NFT.
Nice. Well, cool, man. Again, man, appreciate you. Hope the 22 years. Congratulations. That's an amazing anniversary for a classic album, and definitely want to talk more with you in the future. So thank you so much for being a part of this.
All right, bro. Hit me up. Love you.
Likewise, man. Thank you.
Peace.